Hi, this is Corey Johnston, and today's lesson is going to come from the second chapter in the book of Colossians. And there are no shortage of rival religious claimants in the city of Colossus when it was written. There was legalists, there were proto-Gnostics, and there were ascetics, and Paul deals with them all in their own ways. But for now, it suffices to say that the city of Colossus itself, located approximately 100 miles north of Ephesus, which was a city of some significance in the ancient Roman Empire, was devastated completely by an earthquake in 61 AD. So even though the city itself did not survive, the letter to it survives, and it is considered by many to be one of Paul's masterpieces. And the opening verse reads, "For I want you to know what a great struggle I have for you and those of Laodicea, as for many have not seen my face in the flesh." Laodicea would have been the wider region in the Roman province of Asia Minor, which corresponds to the modern country of Turkey, to which the city of Colossus would have belonged. So it would have been, like I said, 100 miles, or within 100 miles to the north of Ephesus. And he's acknowledging the fact that the bodily contact the lack thereof prevented the communication that he would like. Hence, the necessity of writing in letters and epistles as avenues of instruction are something unique to the Christian religion, and this was motivated by necessity because the Jews lived in an insular nation. The Christian church was instantly pan-national, and this necessitated the communication of letters. In order that their hearts might be encouraged, being knit together in love, into all riches of the entire confirmation of understanding, to a true knowledge of the secret of Elohim, even the Father and the Messiah. So hearts being knit together is indicative of unity, and that is the essence and the ideal manifestation of fellowship. We are united not only in thought and in act, but in heart. And that is a supernatural process beyond any of our natural faculties or capacities willing to do it. And through our hearts being knit together through the one who is uniquely able to do so, he may present us to the profound knowledge of his mysteries which exist in him and in relation to the Father. And this in whom are hidden all the treasures of wisdom and knowledge. The Messiah is the treasure library of spiritual and theological mysteries and wisdom and knowledge. So he knows all. He knows everything there is to know. His attribute is omniscience. So that's been with him. He's a pre-existent creature. He's always known all there is to know. Now, in the when he assumed the flesh in the incarnation, he was not strictly speaking omniscience, as he expressed ignorance as to the exact date of the time of his second coming, but encouraged watchfulness. "For though I am absent in the flesh, yet I am with you in spirit, rejoicing to see your good order and the steadfastness of your faith in Messiah." So even though he is not physically present in their midst, I believe he was in jail when he was writing this, but the spiritual kindredness which he felt with them was enough to sustain him and keep him alive, and that was a sufficient substitute for being in their presence, given the limitations of his present circumstances, being an incarcerated inmate. So he has cause for joy to hear the good report through the grapevine that the assembly which he was intimately invested in was flourishing. "Therefore, as you accepted Messiah Yahshua, the Master, walk in him." Now, acceptance demands and entails in an obligation and responsibility to walk as he walks. And I believe 1 John 2:6 indicates that the most reliable measuring mark and indicator of the extent to which we are abiding is, are we walking how he would walk were he in our shoes. Having been rooted and built up in him and established in the faith as you were taught, overflowing in it with thanksgiving. Gratitude is the natural response to being so instructed and uplifted and educated in that which they have no way of knowing outside of the revelation, which Paul had no way of knowing outside of Elohim. So every truth and every claim of Christianity is not the result of human or independent inquiry, but is wholly and solely derived from a heavenly source who is omniscient. And he gives us everything that we truly need to know, not necessarily everything we would like to know, but everything that we do need to know. And he gives us enough to know, not so much so that we can not live without faith, but not so little that we can live life without hope. See to it that no one makes a prey of you through philosophy and empty deceit, according to the tradition of men, according to the elementary matters of the world, and not according to the Messiah. So the very real presence of these infiltrators and these heretics and false teachers and charlatans who preached and proclaimed an alien philosophy and an alien worldview that was antithetical to the way of the Messiah, or maybe had just enough of the veneer, a superficial veneer of it to lure and entice other people's into it. This is known as the practice of syncretism, whereby we combine elements that are not necessarily meant to be combined, but in order to make for a more aesthetically palatable version than could exist in the absence of their combinations. But philosophy and empty deceit, now philosophy does carry much merits, and there is the virtuous or viceful character of a philosophy is wholly contingent on the philosophy which is espoused, and there was many of the philosophies from the ancient Greece would have been present at this moment in time that are with us today, and it can make you a better person, but it cannot offer you salvation or address your most pressing spiritual needs. So this is not to discourage the study of philosophy, it is only not to rely on it in lieu of theology. And traditions of men, these are distinct from the traditions of Elohim, which we who practice the true religion claim, and elementary matters of the world, that means lower level, lower echelon items of significance, and not according to Messiah, who is preeminent and the standing and measuring rod for all that there is. Because in him dwells all the fullness of the Almighty bodily. So by fullness we understand the term to mean the totality and all of its infinitude of divinity. So within him is a totally divine being and also completely human, and it is one of the mysteries of the faith, and many other religions struggle to reconcile themselves to the idea of divinity being constitutionally able to inhabit an incarnate frame, but it's the consistent Christian witness that this did take place and it did happen, and he is our fullest, most intimate and reliable and accurate revelation of what divinity is, because he was divine and he was human too. And you have been made complete in him, who is the head of the principality and authority. So he is our source of fullness and completeness. He who is full and complete and lacking nothing in divinity we are by proxy vicariously made full through him by faith, and he is the head. That means his sovereignty. There is no place on the earth where his sovereignty does not extend or his authority does not reign. In him you are also circumcised with a circumcision not made with the hands, in the putting off of the body of the sin of the flesh, but by the circumcision of Messiah. So he's referring to a spiritual circumcision, and the physical circumcision, as initiated in Genesis 17, was the mark of every Jew, and it was an item of some controversy in the early Christian church whether the new Gentile converts had to become Jewish, i.e. circumcised. But Paul insisted that the physical circumcision was not necessary and no substitute or replacement for a spiritual circumcision. And in their defense, the Jews did have a concept of a spiritual circumcision expressed in places such as Deuteronomy 10:16 and other places. So that it's to no avail. If you're circumcised, good for you. If not, you're not eternally worse off than if you are. Having been buried with him in baptism, in which you were also raised with him through the faith and the working of Yahweh, who raised him from the dead. So the baptism is our symbolic identification with the death, burial, and resurrection, whereby we theoretically and metaphorically bury our sins in the water and raise into the resurrection of him. And this is the working of Yahweh, who made the resurrection of the Son possible and can extend the gift to us and the blessing and baptism. We follow his example. Now, he didn't need to be baptized, but he did so in order to provide us who do need to be expunged of sin, tangible, invisible example to emulate. And you being dead in your trespasses and in the uncircumcision of your flesh, he has made alive together with him, having forgiven you all his all trespasses. So the remarkable extent of his grace is all-encompassing and universal across the entire scope of our sin, past, not necessarily future, because we can belittle the atonement's efficacy if we continue in sin unrepentant. But once we enter into the baptismal waters, our past is washed away completely, and it is incumbent upon us to retain the integrity of the conviction which prompts the baptism and conversion. Having blotted out the handwriting against us by the dogmas which stood against us, and he has taken it out of the way, having nailed it to the cross. So the concept of crucifixion, a metaphorical or theoretical crucifixion, is also Paul also writes of a co-crucifixion, whereby the sins of the repentant sinner are theoretically nailed to a cross, and he uses a similar analogy to the dogmas of the false religions, which were then prevalent throughout Colossus and the adjacent region. Having stripped the principalities and the authorities, he made a public display of them, having prevailed over them. So the crucifixion was a public view, public execution. So it was made public, and it was very much, whether the spectators witnessed it or not, the decisive battle in the cosmic struggle between good and evil, where evil was defeated decisively. Let no one therefore judge you in eating or in drinking, or in respect of a festival, or a new moons, or Sabbath. So he's saying right here that the observance of dietary restrictions or observance of holidays or Sabbath does not make one any more or less of a Christian, and in fact it makes one less of a Christian to judge another Christian for honoring or failing to honor something that they hold dear. So there is considerable room for allowance and tolerance within the doctrine of Christian liberty, whereby, roughly speaking, all liberties not expressly prohibited by Scripture, the believer is entitled to exercise, inasmuch as it doesn't infringe on the individual conscience or liberty of another believer, which are a shadow of what is to come, but the body of the Messiah. So these observances, these festivals, these holidays were typologies, which is a theological term for a physical representation of something of spiritual truth, so their symbolism pointed to something beyond themselves, but now those things have been fulfilled, and it is found in the Messiah, and who also has a body, which is the church, and it is realized there. So there should be no room for contention or quarrel or controversy in between its members. Let no one deprive you of the prize, one who takes delight in false humility and worship of angels, taking his stand on what he has not seen, puffed up by his fleshly mind. So angel worship was one of the false religions and heresies which had infiltrated that Paul had to contend with. Now angels are worthy of respect and reverence and admiration, but they are not worthy of worship, and to worship them is to bring oneself to the precipice of idolatry. So there's no room for angel worship and proper worship, so it must be expunged. Now angels can be acknowledged, but they cannot be worshipped, and there is a difference. Now angels are spiritually significant intermediary beings between humanity who exist at the behest of divinity, and they are wholly derived from him, and as such point to him and should not displace him in our affection or adoration or worship. And not holding fast to the head, from whom all the body, nourished and knit together by joints and ligaments, grows with the growth of Elohim. Now earlier in the epistle, Paul identifies the Messiah as the head of the church, and we also read, compares it to a body, and that it is composed of several ligaments and appendages, each which perform their collective part in unison and in tandem. And so we are to give rightful reverence, esteem, honor, and praise to the body, who nourishes the without which the remainder of the body would be inoperative and inert. If then you died with Messiah from the elementary matters of the world, why, as though living in the world, do you subject yourselves to dogma? So the word elementary matters emerges once more. We read it first in verse 8. See you not be deceived through philosophies and people focusing on the elementary matters of the world, meaning the lesser, lower tier significance. And in having identified with the resurrection, died means to have been saved, earned life in salvation. There's no need to concern or relapse oneself to the elementary matters which are of no avail or concern in the wide lens of salvation. And there's also equally no reason to submit oneself to dogmas which are of inferior religions, having been released from the one who triumphed over all false worldviews. Do not touch, do not taste, do not handle. These are common prohibitions of legalistic religion, which prohibit people from indulging in certain things, which are all to perish with use, according to the commands and teachings of men. So all physical items are destined and designed to perish, and these indeed have an appearance of wisdom in self-imposed worship, humiliation, and harsh treatment of the body, of no value at all, for satisfaction of the flesh. So even though aestheticism, there is much that is seemingly admirable about the rigorous subjection of self-discipline and pain that the adherent or practitioner subjects them to, even though it's admirable, it's to no avail. They're not earning their salvation or even a more exalted station in that abode. So it's really counterproductive investment of spiritual exercise. And Paul exists, and the scriptures exist precisely to educate us against such counterproductive errors. And that's all the time we have for today. Thank you so much. Tune in next time. Bye-bye.